Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first part of our lecture. We're going to cover two topics this time around. The first one being identity, making sure we have a really clear understanding of all the components that go into identity and also how identity is shaped. From identity, we're going to jump into how we form our attitudes and our morals and our thinking overall. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have just one slide on identity. Identity is how someone thinks of themselves, right? Their abilities, their possibilities, how they see themselves in the world, their capabilities. Now, we have a regular identity of how we see ourselves, and we also have a social identity. And that's how we see ourselves within the context of the community or within a group. So, for example, what groups do we see ourselves identifying in that are social categories? Do we identify as a boy or a girl? Do we identify as a mom, working mom, a stay at home mom? Or do we identify ourselves as vegetarians or meat eaters or hunters? All of those things are social identities. They've been defined by society for us, and then we place ourselves in one category or another. All right, with that, so what do we think about when we think about how identity forms for children? Well, the first piece is environment. What are they surrounded by? What are they seeing every day? That's a huge piece. And if you're going to be a classroom teacher, something to be mindful of and making sure the identity is a true representation and a positive representation of pieces of their identity, of who they are. The other piece around how we form identity is the language we use in order to speak and talk about these groups of people or people in general. Thinking about, for example, we're going to talk about gender this week. You know, how many times we use the word man, words we associate with being female versus male. All of that is our language and how we describe different groups and different social identities. And it helps form that piece for us. And the last piece would be materials. So, what are we allowing children to engage in? This is especially true for gender identity. What toys do we associate with boys versus girls? All of these things really build how children kind of form their thinking that have nothing to do with direct interaction with them, but they are being exposed to on a daily basis. All right, with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about values, morals, and attitudes and how those come into form. So, values are just traits, beliefs, and qualities which are viewed as favorable and significant. So, things that we hold true and true to our heart, right? Things that we really want to withhold and make sure we're upholding. They are formed, we have two different kinds. We have societal values and we have personal values. So, we think about societal values, those are things that as a society we value. A great example is the current discussion around bathrooms and whether or not there should be separation of boys versus girls bathrooms and who should be able to use those. Those are things that are societal values. They are dictating whether or not we value them. Personal values are much more true to what we feel. They can be around whether or not we feel something is fair or logical. And the influences on each of these, so if we think about our societal perceptions, the first thing we can think about as influencing is normality. This idea of what is normal right now in society and for culture. A good representation of how these things change is civil rights. We've seen over time, within the last even 100 years, how we have shifted our thinking on who deserves rights, what those rights should look like, and all of that is formed by normality. What does the culture currently say is acceptable? Our personal perceptions are shaped more by our age. So as we age, we tend to think of things differently. And our moral reasoning. Do we have a strong moral reasoning, or do we justify things easily and our actions easily because we don't have such a strong moral reasoning? Both of those are going to impact our personal perceptions. We look about morality. There's a lot of different ways to think about how morality develops. And we have some theorists who have ideas around that. The first one being Piaget. And if you haven't taken child development, Piaget is a child development theorist. And he has a lot of understanding of how children develop in stages. So when he looks at morality, he looks at it as kind of two different sides. You start with being able to have this heteronomous morality. And what that means is you have a very strong sense of right and wrong. You're basically taught what to do. And the reason you continue to engage in making good decisions versus bad decisions is because they have been modeled for you and been reinforced, and you also have consequences for not engaging in the right behavior. So it's very black and white. You don't shift with the rules. But then he argues that eventually that shifts to autonomous morality. And the idea that we have an internal understanding of what is right and wrong, and we can bend these rules if necessary. So we can have some justification for why we're following them. So it's not so much black and white anymore. After Piaget, the next theorist we're going to talk about is Freud. Freud really believed that you were moral based on what you learned from your same sex parent. So, because I identify as a girl, I would learn from my mother what was morally acceptable, what was expected of me. Another piece of Freud's theory was the superego, the idea that we have our ego, and our id, and our superego was kind of the negotiation between the two, what we really wanted, and then also what we understood to be norm. So our superego is kind of this, like, if you think about the picture of the devil and the angel on the shoulder, that's your superego, that kind of pull back and forth of what you want versus what you know is acceptable. And so your superego kind of helped you dictate your morality. He argued that you engaged in morality and making moral decisions because you were afraid of losing your parents' affection. And that was the main kind of driving force behind why you would be moral. The last one is Kohlberg, and he thought more in depth about morality, and he thought there were stages that you would actually move through in morality. And the stages were the same regardless of the culture you were exposed to. And really, the changes over those stages was very gradual. You weren't really jumping from one to the other very quickly. It took a lot of time for them to develop. I want you to take a closer look at the different stages for Kohlberg's theory. You would start in the pre-conventional level, and this is really where you're thinking about your own personal consequences, which relates to Piaget and Freud as well, right? You're thinking about, how does this impact me? And from there, you would go to the conventional level where you're starting to think about others in the context. So I know how it affects me. How is it going to affect everybody around me? How are they going to perceive the behavior? And then after you go through those two levels, you would move into the post-conventional level where you start weighing different actions and different viewpoints and factors. So you're taking in multiple contexts. So it's not I can or I can't. There's grades of shades of gray, right? I can maybe do a little bit. I might do this action in this circumstance, but not another circumstance. For example, if we look at the idea of stealing something, this is when you got into the kind of sometimes stealing might be acceptable and sometimes it is absolutely not acceptable. For example, if I was a starving mother and I had children to feed and they did not have any food, my morality might say it is okay to steal food from my children. But if I was somebody who had plenty of money, very wealthy, had everything I ever wanted, then stealing is obviously not okay. So that is something that the post-conventional level would be able to grapple with. What conditions make certain behaviors okay? All right, these levels actually split down into stages even more. So we look at the pre-conventional, it breaks into stage 1 and stage 2. And so the idea shifts from I don't want to get in trouble to what can I do to be reinforced? How can my actions give me positive reinforcement? How can people think of me in a good light? And then we go into the conventional stage, which is stages 3 and 4, whereas you're wanting, again, thinking about other people external to yourself, and you're wanting to make everybody else happy and approve of you. And you're also wanting to avoid the shame and the guilt of not making people happy. And then you go into the last two stages, 5 and 6, in the post-conventional stage, and you're really motivated to kind of gain a respect and have people see you in a good light. And you also are motivated by your internal value system at this point in time. You have a strong sense of who you want to be and who you want to be remembered by and how you want to be remembered. And that is stage 6, is kind of I want to be respected, and I also want to feel like I'm staying true to myself. So you can see how it progresses from I'm just thinking about what I want to I'm thinking about what everybody else is thinking to now I'm taking in lots of different factors, and I'm also weighing the fact of who I want to be and who I want to be thought of as a person. How do I want to be thought of? All right, so those are our theories of moral development. Let's talk about how attitudes develop from a child development point of view. So as early as 3 months, we see children not exposed to diversity will demonstrate a preference for looking at their own race. So they'll look longer at races that identify more similarly with their own, and that's because they haven't had that exposure to different face structures, different diversity around looks. And then from there, we also see some additional development around attitudes. So in phase 1, children around the age of 2.5 to 3 years old are aware of cultural differences. They understand that there's things that are happening that are different. By the age of 4, they're actually able to start using those words and concepts. And then by phase 3, they really have an attitude toward culture. So understanding whether or not a culture in their mind is a good one or not, if it's something that they want to be part of or not part of. Okay, so very early starts developing. We have a lot of influences on our attitudes, including our family, and that, our family influences our attitudes by modeling behaviors for us, providing instruction on how we should think about things. Both modeling and instruction are either followed by punishment or reinforcement, making our likelihood of engaging in that behavior more or less likely. Our peers also influence it from a place of we're constantly comparing our own attitudes to our in group. So, who do we identify with, and are our attitudes similar to those people that we consider to be like us? So that's how they influence it. We are also more likely to have prejudices against people who are in our out group, people who are not in our in group. Media obviously influences it because we see television and movies and books, and all of those things have representation of different cultures and genders and sexualities, and that's going to influence our knowledge and our thinking around things. Communities hold certain values around, genders and whether or not they should be able to access certain things in different cultures. So that's obviously a large piece. And schools as well have a big influence on our attitudes towards different groups of people in two ways. One is with curriculum, right? How we're learning about different cultures, whether or not we're even exposed to different cultures in our curriculum, and also how teachers interact with different children in the classroom. So if teachers are really encouraging and give a lot of positive feedback with certain groups of students, that's going to frame how we think about them and ourselves. Conversely, if they are more quick to receive punishment or quick to be corrected, then we are also going to view that in a certain light. And if we're part of that group, we're going to view ourselves with that as well. So that's why it's important to really understand identity, because identity plays into how people think about us and how we think about ourselves. We have attitudes that have connections to those components of identity. Okay? All right, with that, I'm going to take a break here. We're going to come back and talk about stereotypes, prejudice, and bias. I'll see you then.